The general rule is that the amount of electricity injected in the grid and the one consumed must always be the same. While it is TSO's role to maintain this balance continuously every second, electricity markets are fundamental to drive investments in the necessary resources to keep the lights on, something we call system adequacy. As we move to a decarbonized power system relying on weather-dependent renewables, we need market mechanisms that preserve this system adequacy while we phase out fossil fuel generation. Well-designed markets will ensure that we have sufficient flexibility and capacity in the system when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, especially over longer periods of time. Capacity mechanisms are electricity market instruments in place in several countries in EU and outside the EU that remunerates resources, generation, demand response and storage for their capacity to support the system when most needed. With capacity mechanism, these resources receive additional revenues on top of the price of the electricity they sell or they avoid to consume. In times where electricity prices are volatile, unpredictable, and sometimes subject to regulatory intervention, these additional revenues can be decisive to determine whether an investment will be made or not. Under current electricity regulation, Member States can introduce capacity mechanisms, but only as a last resort measure, and after having implemented other market design solutions to address adequacy concerns. Any introduction of capacity mechanisms must first be approved by the European Commission, which assesses their efficiency, proportionality, and compliance with stated guideline rules. Emission limits are also defined in regulation to avoid that the most polluting plants are rewarded under capacity mechanisms. ENTSO-E believes the current framework for capacity mechanism must be simplified to allow a quicker and more stable introduction by Member States. As we move to a power system with a higher share of variable renewables, we also need stable long-term signals to make sure that the existing and necessary flexibility assets are kept and to speed up investments in new flexibility resources. As such, we think it's time to reform today's framework for capacity mechanism that considers them only as a last resort mechanism and recognize them that can be a structural element of national energy markets. This doesn't mean getting rid of the checks and balances of the stated guidelines, nor of the emission limits or of the requirements for EU coordination. What we need are EU rules that do not overcomplicate the introduction of these mechanisms. Approval processes today can take up to several years, but timing is key when solving adequacy issues. The length and complexity of these processes must be reduced to avoid delays that could increase risks for the power system and for consumers.